What if I told you there is this old commander that lets you fill the battlefield with face down trap cards and keeps your opponents guessing every single turn? Kadena, Slinking Sorcerer. For 4 mana in Sultai colors we get a 3/3 snake wizard that was released way back in 2019 as the face commander of her own precon. Now Kadena comes with 2 abilities that are all about one of the weirdest and most unique mechanics in Magic: face down creatures. Her first ability states that the first face down creature we cast during each turn will cost 3 generic mana less. Now while that ability might not sound like much at first, just consider that almost any face down mechanic like Morph, Megamorph or Disguise will make those creatures cost exactly 3 generic mana. Which means that with Kadena on the battlefield, the first one of those creatures we cast in a turn becomes completely free. And because every single one of those creatures will instantly trigger Kadena's second ability that will draw a card whenever a face down creature enters the battlefield, all of these face down cards essentially turn into free cantrips that will just replace themselves whenever we play them, while simultaneously also building our board. Now while having both card draw and cost reduction in the command zone already sounds pretty incredible, trust me, we're only scratching the surface. Because once we start adding the right support cards into the mix, Kadena quickly goes from pretty good to completely absurd. The single most important cards in the entire deck are our Flash Enablers, which are cards that allow us to cast all of our creatures on instant speed, and that is exactly where things get really silly. Just notice how Kadena's first ability is worded. She doesn't reduce the cost of the first face down creature we cast during our turn. She reduces the cost of the first one we cast during each turn. Which means once we do have our commander and a Flash Enabler on the battlefield, we can just cast a face down creature for free during our turn and draw cards. Then do exactly the same thing during opponent 1's turn, opponent 2's turn, and opponent 3's turn without ever having to spend a single mana. And by the time it's our turn again, we will have drawn 4 extra cards, established a big board state of face down creatures, and your opponents having no clue as to what they actually do. If you ever watched Yu-Gi-Oh! As a kid, this deck captures the exact same feeling. You're constantly going to be setting mysterious face-down cards on the battlefield, leaving your opponents wondering as to what each one does, before revealing them at the exact right moment to just totally ruin their game plan. And speaking of revealing them, one of the coolest things about turning cards face up is that it doesn't actually use the stack. It is what's known as a special action, meaning that your opponents can't respond whenever you are flipping your creatures up. If you decide to flip them, it is simply happening. Whether that creature destroys a permanent, counters a spell, or bounces something back to its owner's hand, your opponents won't get a chance to remove it first. And that is an incredibly powerful tool to have access to in Commander, especially in pots where instant speed interaction is everywhere nowadays. Now while Kadena was originally printed back in 2019, the face down mechanic did receive some fantastic new support over the years. Abilities like Manifest and Manifest Dread from the Duskmourn set do allow us to put even more face down permanents onto the battlefield. And because all of those count as face down creatures entering the battlefield, every single one of them will trigger Kadena's card draw ability. And as you're about to see, some of these interactions with newer cards are truly ridiculous. Now since Kadena is both a cost reducer and a card draw engine sitting in the command zone, we don't need any expensive staples to make a powerful deck. Which is exactly why I decided to build this deck on a €100 budget, making one of Magic's most unique and underrated mechanics virtually available to every Commander player. As I do in all my videos, I will be going over every single card in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up into 6 categories: the face down creatures, face down support, the general support cards, acceleration, protection and interaction, and the lands. And let's start with the heart of the deck, the face down creatures. These are all of the creatures with the Morph, Megamorph and Disguise mechanic we will be casting face down throughout the game. Thanks to Kadena's ability, the first one of these we cast every turn will be completely free and it will replace itself by drawing us a card. Now while their face down side is just a little humble 2/2 creature, the real magic happens whenever we do flip them up. Whether they destroy permanents, counter spells, bounce creatures, or doing even crazier things, these creatures are the trap cards of our deck, always keeping our opponents guessing what their effects truly are. Inox Survivalist and Nantuko Vigilante. Both of these are morph creatures you can cast face down for just 3 generic mana, or for free whenever you do have your commander on the battlefield, while even getting to draw a card of them whenever you do so. Both of these creatures can then be turned face up for just 2 mana on instant speed, and whenever you do so you get to destroy either target artifact or enchantment, allowing you to disrupt your opponent's tempo by destroying any sort of mana rock or mana accelerating enchantment, or even allow you to deal with any sort of big value pieces like a Ristic Study, a Great Henge, or even a Sacrifice Dex for Action Altar, making both of these cards function as excellent morph fodder to trigger Kadena's abilities while also acting as some really solid removal tools to disrupt whatever our opponents are doing. Talking about disruption, we're also playing an Exit Specialist and an Echo Tracer. 2 more morph creatures that whenever you do decide to turn them face up will allow you to bounce any creature on the battlefield back to its owner's hand, giving you a really solid way to just destroy your opponent's tempo if they just stepped out to play a massive high mana value creature, bounce back any sort of big hitting creature that's about to take you out on combat damage. They give you a way to disrupt someone's combo by just bouncing one of their vital combo piece creatures, and whenever someone is trying to cast a spot removal spell targeted at your Kadena, you can just flip one of these creatures on instant speed and bounce her back to your hand to protect her. And one of my favorite things to do with these type of bounce effects is just use it on any sort of morph creature that I already flipped to trigger its ability. It will then return to your hand and you will be able to cast it face down for free thanks to Kadena, and you will even get to draw a card of it. And since it enters face down again, you will be able to flip it again and get another use out of whatever ability the card has. Kadena Silencer, a card with the Mega Morph ability which functions in exactly the same way as regular morph, but whenever you do flip it, it will even get a +1/+1 counter. And whenever this creature is flipped up for just 2 mana, you get to counter all abilities that your opponents control, which really is a lot more impactful than it sounds. If you're playing against a landfall player that's about to cast Escape Shift with either a Skewed Swarm or a Field of the Dead on the battlefield, whenever all of those triggers now go on the stack, you can just flip this creature and they won't get any tokens of it. If you're playing against a Krenko player and they are tapping their commander to create 20 goblins with a Pugferos on the battlefield, you can just flip this creature, make all of those triggers fizzle and prevent yourself from losing the game. If you're playing against any sort of Aristocrats deck that has a Blood Artist on the battlefield and 10 of their creatures just died, you can just flip this card and instead of them draining out the table, they will just have lost their entire board without getting anything in return for it. Stratus Dancer and Void Mage Apprentice. Whenever we flip our Stratus Dancer for just 2 mana, we get to counter target instant or sorcery spell, and whenever we flip Void Mage Apprentice, we get to counter any spell for 4 mana. And just like I explained in the intro of the video, since Morph doesn't use the stack, these are essentially some uncounterable counter spells. The only thing your opponents can do to stop these effects from happening is using a Stifle, but no one is playing that, making these cards into excellent trap card fodder we can get on the battlefield for free thanks to Kadena's ability. And whenever your opponents are then casting any sort of spell that you don't like, you can just flip them up and stop it from happening. And talking about protection, we're also playing a Willbender and a Mistfire Weaver. Willbender is essentially a deflecting sword for 2 mana whenever we do turn it face up, while Mistfire Weaver will just straight up give hexproof to a creature we control whenever we flip it, giving us even more options to protect both our commander and any of our value creatures from any sort of spot removal or destroy effects. And these cards are also the perfect example of why this morph deck is this much fun to pilot, because even after playing like 10 games versus this deck, the mystery will always remain the same for your opponents. You can just have your Kadena and 3 face down creatures on the battlefield and a little bit of spare mana open. The face down creatures can be some simple bouncers, some counter spells, or some protection options, and your opponents will just never ever know what they truly are until you flip them. Now of course we also have morph creatures that act as spot removal in the form of Silumgar Assassin, a creature we can flip face up for just 3 mana, and whenever we do so we get to pick any creature on the battlefield with power 3 or less and just destroy it. Now while in most decks this effect is just absolutely horrible because it will cost you a total of 5 mana to morph this creature and then flip it, thanks to Kadena you can just morph it in for free and even draw a card of it, and then you will have a face down removal option available on the board you can use on instant speed whenever you like, which is just perfect to deal with any sort of low power high value commander like a Waita, an Ishin, or even a Sephiroth. Then Protector. And let me tell you, if you thought Eternal Witness is a good card, you are going to love this guy. Baseline it does come with exactly the same effect for 2 mana more, because you'll have to cast it face down for 3 mana first and then you can flip it up for 2 mana. But that cost is just for regular decks, because thanks to Kadena we will be able to morph this in for free and also draw a card of it, and then on a later turn whenever we do need its effect we can just flip it face up on instant speed for 2 mana, making it even more efficient than a classic Eternal Witness. And the best part about this sort of Eternal Witness effect is that you can use it to recur any card, not just permanents. You can use it on any sort of enchantment, planeswalker, or even any sort of counterspell that you used over the course of the game. No matter how you lost it, a Den Protector will make sure you will get a second use of it. Printlifter Ooze, probably one of the strongest disguise creatures ever printed. It's a dead touch body that whenever itself or any other creature you control is turned face up will generate you an Ooze token with trample that will enter the battlefield with X+1/+1 counters on it, X being the total amount of other creatures you control. Now as you will see later in this video, this deck has a really easy time generating a crazy wide board state with a ton of face down creatures and a bunch of tokens, which this card will then translate into a huge army of these massive trample Ooze tokens. And just keep in mind that you can flip any of your creatures on instant speed, so if you do so during an opponent's turn, by the time it's your turn again they won't have summoning sickness and you will instantly be able to swing with them. And since every Ooze you generate will just keep growing bigger and bigger and bigger because it will take into account all of the other Ooze tokens that you generated, this little card is totally capable of taking over the game all by itself, and it is actually one of the best win cons in the entire deck. Grim Haruspex, a card that many people know as a staple in aristocrat decks, but only few of them know that it also has the morph ability. And for as long as this card is on the battlefield, whenever any non-token creature you controls would die, you get to draw a card. And this effect just triggers off anything. Creatures dying in combat, opponents using spot removal, and it also functions as some sort of board wipe insurance. Because let's say you have 5 creatures and a Grim Haruspex on the battlefield and an opponent is casting a board wipe. This card will then see all 5 of those creatures dying, draw you 5 new cards in the process, just refilling your hand and allowing you to set up your new board on the next turn. And while in most decks this card is already incredible to play for just a regular 3 mana cost, in this deck it gets even better, because we'll be able to get it onto the battlefield for free thanks to our commander and also make it act as a cantrip, and then whenever a ton of your creatures are about to die due to a board wipe or due to combat, you can just flip it up for 1 black mana and you will get to draw a huge amount of cards of it. Usually whenever an opponent is casting a wipe and you flip this card up, their faces will look like the shocked emoji. And now that we're on the topic of board wipes, we're also playing our own Bane of the Living, a creature we can flip face up for 2 black mana plus X, and whenever we do so, each creature on the battlefield will get -X X until the end of turn. Now since we're playing a creature heavy deck and all of our face down permanents will only have a 2/2 stat line, we don't really want to run that many board wipes. That being said, we do need some sort of a panic button whenever our opponents are overwhelming us on the board and we don't really have anything going for us. And what's better for that than a board wipe that comes attached to a morph body we can use to trigger Kadena's abilities and all of the other face down synergies we're playing in this deck. Unlike a regular board wipe that would just be sitting in our hand whenever we don't need it as a dead card, we can just play this creature face down and then flip it whenever we do need it. Deathmist Raptor, one of the weirdest and most unique cards in the entire deck. It's a creature body with Megamorph 5 that does have the Death Touch keyword, making this thing into an excellent trap card. Because whenever you either are swinging this at an opponent or you're using this as a blocker, you can just turn it face up and it will destroy whatever thing it does get into combat with. Now usually you will then also lose your Raptor, but that is where its second ability comes in. Whenever any permanent you control is turned face up, you can return Deathmist Raptor from your graveyard straight to the battlefield and you can choose to either make it enter face up or face down, making this into a really annoying Death Touch body that will just keep coming back over and over again for us just playing the deck as we normally would. And whenever you do decide to make this creature return face down, it will be a face down creature entering that will draw you a card of Kadena's ability. And trust me, it happens more often than you think that you do return this creature face down to the battlefield and your opponents forget what this card actually is. They will just swing into you again, you will flip your Death Touch blocker, destroy whatever creature they have, and in the next game they will always be writing down whatever permanents you have on the battlefield face down if they do have the information of what the card actually does. Kiru's Spell Snatcher. Whenever you flip this creature face up, you get to counter any spell on the stack. But unlike a Void Mage Apprentice, instead of making that spell just go to the graveyard, you get to exile it instead and you will be able to cast it without paying its mana cost for the remainder of the game. So not only does it function as yet another disruption tool to stop any of your opponent's big threats from happening or to protect your own board from removal, it will also give you permanent access to a one-time use of the spell you can cast without paying any mana for it. You can stop any board wipe from happening and get access to it for the rest of the game whenever you need it. And not only will this effect stop an opponent's Etali or Elesh Norn from resolving, but you will be able to cast your own copy of it for absolutely free. Now while 6 mana might sound like a huge amount, as you will see later we do have more efficient ways to flip this card and this deck is able to generate absolutely insane amounts of mana. Chrome Shell Crab, a creature that whenever it is turned face up will allow us to exchange control of any creature we control for a creature an opponent controls. Now the coolest thing about this ability is that we can just have this creature sitting face down on the battlefield and we will be able to use it on instant speed whenever we need it most, allowing us to steal a Spellslinger's player Storm, kill an artist and just shutting down whatever combo they are trying to set up. If a graveyard deck is using a reanimate on their consecrated Sphinx, we can just say thank you and give them a crab in return. And probably the best use for this effect is whenever someone is playing their high cost commander like a Magnus Calgar, you can just take it for yourself, and if they don't have any way to remove their commander from your side of the battlefield, they won't ever be able to get it back again, just totally shutting down some specific commander centric decks. Thousand Winds, a big morph bomb creature that whenever it is turned face up will bounce any tapped creature on the battlefield back to its owner's hand. A really good trap card, especially later in the game whenever opponents have a ton of creatures on the battlefield and they are tapping them to swing at each other. You can then just flip this thing on instant speed, reset the entire board and set your opponents back into the Stone Age. And a fun thing you can do with this card is that whenever you do control a board of already flipped morph creatures, you can just go to combat, swing with all of them, and before your opponents even get a chance to declare their blockers, you can activate this creature. Just bounce all of them back to your hand, you will be able to cast them face down again and draw some cards of Kadena, and you will then be able to flip them again and get another use of whatever effect they have. Vesuvan Shapeshifter, a morph creature that whenever it either enters a battlefield or is turned face up will allow you to turn it into a copy of any other creature on the battlefield. And at the beginning of your upkeep, it does give you the option to turn this thing face down again. Now by itself, this is already a really cost efficient clone effect, because we will be able to cast it for 0 mana thanks to Kadena and then just flip it up for 2 mana, allowing us to copy any of our own value creatures or even copy any sort of big threat that our opponents might have on the battlefield. Now the best thing is that we can just reset this card again at the beginning of our upkeep to just copy another target for 2 mana, and it also has a really cool and unique interaction with any sort of face up morph creature we control. Let's say you have an Echo Tracer face up on the battlefield and you pay 2 mana to turn this creature face up and make it enter as a copy of the Echo Tracer. Due to the way of how this card's ability is worded, it essentially turns into some sort of a replacement effect, meaning it will turn into a copy and then flip face up, giving you the bounce trigger of your Echo Tracer. And since this card's ability is worded in this specific way, it does set up for a 2-card combo with the next card, Brine Elemental, a creature that whenever it is turned face up will make each opponent skip their next untap step. Now especially in the later stages of the game, this effect can be absolutely brutal, because most of your opponents will be spending all of their mana by tapping all of their lands and tapping their creatures to swing at each other, and whenever you then flip your pickle, it will essentially make them skip their next turn. Now the main reason this card is included in the deck is because it does set up a 2-card combo lock on the entire table. You'll need a face up Brine Elemental on the battlefield and a face down Vesuvian Shapeshifter. You can then simply start this combo off by paying 2 mana to flip your Shapeshifter face up. As it is turning face up, you decide to make it into a copy of your Brine Elemental, which will give you a trigger out of its ability. Each opponent will then have to skip their next untap step. When the turn order then comes to you again, you can just turn your Shapeshifter face down at the beginning of your upkeep, and you will then be able to repeat this process over and over again, making sure that your opponents won't ever get to untap anything anymore. Now while this isn't a combo deck by any means, and we're not playing any tutors to go fetch up either of these cards, with the huge amount of cards we'll be drawing off Kadena, it's pretty likely that you'll get to see these 2 cards, and whenever you are able to set up this lock, it is pretty likely that you'll just win the game of it. Next up, we have our face down Synergies. These are the cards that will allow us to create additional face down creatures through mechanics like Cloak and Manifest, give us additional ways to turn our creatures face up, and provide us with even more payoffs for just doing what this deck already wants to do. Houndwood Shrieker, a 3-mana creature that whenever it attacks will allow us to manifest Dread, which means we get to look at the top 2 cards of our library, put one of them in our graveyard and one of them onto the battlefield as a face down 2/2 creature, which is just a fantastic mechanic to get additional face down creatures onto the battlefield and draw us cards of Kadena, while also giving us some sort of card selection, just allowing us to pick whatever thing we do want onto the battlefield as a face down creature, just making sure that you can pick some of your morph creatures or even some creatures with a huge mana cost that you can use this creature's second ability on to sort of cheat them into play. Because for just 2 mana you get to reveal any sort of face down card you control, and if it is a creature you get to turn it face up, which is a really cost efficient way to turn some of your huge morph creatures like a Thousand Winds, a Brine Elemental or a Karu Spell Snatcher face up, or if you do manage to get one of our biggest creatures in the deck onto the battlefield face down, you will be able to sort of cheat it into play for just 2 mana. Abhorrent Oculus. This is by far the most expensive card in the entire deck, and it does eat up a ton of our €100 budget, but this card is just an absolute powerhouse. If you want to cast a spell as an additional cost, you will have to exile 6 cards from your graveyard, which in this deck usually won't be a problem with all of the manifesting dread we'll be doing, and all of the acceleration pieces we use early in the game will end up in our graveyard. Or whenever you're able to get this card onto the battlefield face down by using the manifest mechanic, you will easily be able to turn it face up by paying its really low mana cost. Now for all of that hassle, we do get a massive 3 mana 5/5 Flying Eyeball that really reminds me of that one Terraria boss fight that just has a truly insane passive ability. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep we get to manifest Dread, which will trigger 4 times per turn cycle, giving you 4 face down creatures and 4 cards of Kadena, while also getting a bunch of your Morph creatures onto the battlefield for absolutely free, both providing you with a really crazy board state and a huge amount of card draw of your commander. Etrata, Deadly Fugitive, a 3 mana death touch body that will give all face down creatures we control an additional ability. For 4 mana we get to turn that creature face up, and if we can, because the backside isn't a creature, we get to exile that spell instead, and we get the ability to play it without paying its mana cost. And this is one of the few abilities in existence that does give you a way to turn non-creature spells face up and still get a use out of them. Because let's say you're manifesting Dread and you do have to put an enchantment or one of our planeswalkers face down on the battlefield. While usually these cards would just be lost because we don't have any way to turn them face up, Etrata totally solves that problem. She also comes with a second ability that whenever any assassin you control deals combat damage to an opponent will allow you to cloak the top card of that player's library, making it enter as a face down creature on your side of the battlefield, which will give you an additional Kadena trigger, and whatever you hit of this effect you will be able to flip face up and get a use out of it thanks to Etrata's ability. Now we're not really playing any assassins in this deck, but the fact that Etrata is a 1/4 assassin body herself makes it pretty unlikely for your opponents to ever block this, and you will usually be able to get some combat damage through with her. And one of my favorite pet cards in the entire deck is the Cyber Controller. Now I'm gonna be honest, I might be a little biased about this card because I do have a deck on it which I absolutely love playing. For 3 mana plus X you get a creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will make each opponent mill X cards. All creatures that are milled due to this ability will be put onto your side of the battlefield as face down 2/2 artifact Cyberman creatures. And this thing is just the perfect mana sink to dump all of the mana that we'll be generating in this deck into, especially later in the game, because it will be milling your opponents, which if you do get lucky will get rid of their win cons. It will generate you a ton of face down creatures entering the battlefield, which Kadena will translate into a ridiculous amount of card draw. You'll get a crazy army of Cyberman tokens that will even be 3/3 creatures thanks to Cyber Controller's last passive ability, and you will be able to use cards like your Houndwood Shrieker or your Etrata to just turn face up whatever creatures you milled with this effect. And one of the strongest cards for the face down archetype that we got after the Kadena precon did release is Eugen's Mastery. It's a 4 mana enchantment that whenever we cast any colorless creature spell will allow us to manifest the top card of our library. Now just to clarify, whenever you are casting any sort of morph creature, it does count as a colorless creature spell. So whenever you're now morphing anything for free with Kadena on the battlefield, you will get 2 face down creatures instead, and you will get to draw 2 cards of it. Essentially just doubling up on all of the card draw value that our commander already generates for us, while also allowing us to cheat some additional morph creatures into play. Now while just that first ability alone is already more than enough reason to include this card in the deck, it also has a pretty awesome second ability. Whenever you attack and your attacking creatures have a total power of 6 or more, you get to pick any face down creature on the battlefield and flip it face up, which will trigger the abilities of all of our morph creatures. You can use it to flip up whatever creatures you stole off your opponents with your Cyber Controller, and it will even allow you to bypass some of the massive morph costs that some of our creatures do have. Zimone, Mystery Unraveler, a 4 mana creature that whenever any land enters a battlefield under your control will allow you to manifest Dread, giving us yet another face down creature and an additional card of Kadena's ability every turn whenever we do make our land drop, and whenever this ability resolves for the second time or more in a turn, instead of manifesting Dread we get to pick any permanent we have on the battlefield and turn it face up, which just like the previous cards will give us an additional way to bypass any sort of morph costs. Now while it might be quite hard to get multiple land drops in a single turn, as you will see later in the acceleration section, we do have some ways for that. Or if you don't care about the budget of this deck, you could also run all of the fetch lands, which will automatically make it so that you will have 2 land drops in a single turn. Vanifax, Evolved Enigma, a 4 mana creature that at the beginning of combat on your turn will allow you to pick one out of its two options. The first option will allow you to cloak any card from your hand onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, which you can use to just get an additional Kadena trigger and get some free morph creatures onto the battlefield. And the second ability will put a +1/+1 counter onto each colorless creature you control, which in this deck is actually a really solid win condition because any card you have face down on the battlefield will be colorless, and even if you do decide to turn them face up, they will just retain all of their counters, giving you a huge amount of stats on the board that you can just turn sideways and take out opponents on combat damage. Primordial Mist, a 5-mana enchantment that at the beginning of your end step will allow you to manifest the top card of your library, simply giving us additional face down creatures and additional cards of our commander. Now the main reason why this card is included is its second ability that will allow us to exile any sort of face down permanent we control, and we get the option to play it until the end of turn. A card that, just like a Trata, will allow us to cast any sort of non-creature permanent we have lying on the battlefield face down. Enchantments, planeswalkers, non-creature spells, and even lands. The main difference being is that we still do have to pay the full mana cost to play the exiled card. And this card has a really cool interaction whenever you do have your commander and a Flash Enabler on the battlefield. On your turn you can just cast any morph creature for free and draw a card of it, then pass the turn to an opponent and use this enchantment's ability to exile the morphed creature. Due to the way of how Kadena's ability is worded, you will then be able to just morph the creature in from exile again, draw a new card of it, and you will be able to recast it during each opponent's turn, just guaranteeing you those 4 extra cards per turn cycle by only using one single morph creature. They Came from the Pipes, another 5-mana enchantment that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow you to manifest Dread twice. And passively, this thing has exactly the same ability as our commander. Whenever any sort of face down creature enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card of it. Now first up, whenever you just play this card, it will already have an immediate impact by drawing you 2 cards thanks to 2 face down creatures entering the battlefield. As you will see later, this entire deck is built around getting Kadena onto the battlefield from as early as turn 3, and whenever you then are able to follow up with this card on turn 4, you will instantly get to draw 4 new cards whenever you play it. And if you then follow up with any sort of free morph creature thanks to Kadena, you will have drawn a total of 6 cards of their effects from as early as turn 4. And this card also gives the deck some sort of redundancy, because whenever Kadena isn't available to cast for you, this thing has exactly the same effect and it is the perfect backup for it. Curator Beastie, a 6-mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield or it attacks will allow us to manifest Dread. Another engine that will keep generating us these face down creature bodies whenever we attack with it every single turn, giving us a ton of card draw of Kadena, and passively it will also make any colorless creature that enters a battlefield under our control enter with 2 additional +1/+1 counters, also applying to its own manifest Dread, meaning that this creature whenever it enters the battlefield will already give you 10/10 worth of stats, while also giving any sort of face down creature that enters through any other source of 4/4 base stat line, going absolutely nuts with cards that do allow us to cheat 4 face down creatures into play every single turn cycle, like whenever we do have Kadena, a Flash Enabler, and a Eugen's Mastery on the battlefield. It will give you an incredible amount of stats whenever you do resolve your Cyber Controller, and it will buff up all of your Cyberman tokens. And just imagine having both this thing and an Abhorrent Oculus on the battlefield at the same time, which will generate you a total 16 power and 16 toughness every single turn cycle. Thieving Amalgam, a massive 7-mana ape snake that, just like our flying eyeball at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, will allow us to manifest the top card of their library, which means another 4 face down creatures per turn cycle and another 4 cards of Kadena, while also giving us the ability to use things like our Etrata or Primordial Mist to just cast our opponent's own cards and use them against them. It also comes with a small little drain effect that whenever any creature you control but don't own would die, will make the owner of that creature lose 2 life and you get to gain 2 life. So whenever your opponents are dealing with their own own face down cards, you will now be draining them out in the process. Now if you don't care about the budget of this deck, I'd actually recommend replacing this Ape Snake with Eugen, Eye of the Storms, a massive 7 mana colorless planeswalker that whenever you cast it will allow you to exile up to 1 permanent with 1 or more colors. And passively this effect will just keep triggering whenever you do cast a colorless spell. Trust me, with all of the Morph creatures we'll be casting for free thanks to our commander, this ability is just absolutely crazy. Whenever you are able to start chaining your Morph creatures, this ability will allow you to just decimate whatever your opponents do have on the battlefield. And outside of that, it's just an excellent value engine that you can keep plussing up over the course of the game that will provide you with an additional consistent stream of card draw. And the card with the highest mana cost in this entire deck is Kozilek, the Broken Reality, aka the Big Daddy of face down creatures. Whenever you cast this massive 9 mana Eldrazi, up to 2 players get to manifest the top 2 cards of their library. For each card manifested this way, you get to draw a card. So you can just target this at one of your opponents and yourself. You will then get to draw 4 cards and 2 face down bodies on the battlefield, which will draw you 2 additional cards if you do have Kadena on the battlefield. Now while this ability will already instantly refill your entire hand, the best part about this card is actually its last passive ability, which is a really brutal anthem effect that will give all of your colorless creatures a +3 power and +2 toughness boost, just turning all of your small little 2/2 face down creatures into absolutely brutal 5/4 combat machines. Usually you will just spend the mid game building up an entire board of face down and colorless creatures, then drop your Kozilek and you will instantly be able to take a couple opponents out of the game by dealing combat damage. Before we continue, I want to give a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members. These high quality commander videos do take a huge amount of time to build, to shoot and to edit, and it's all thanks to the YouTube members that I'm able to pump out these videos week after week. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for allowing me to have this much fun building these decks and producing these videos. If you'd like to support the channel for yourself, there is a big join button below the video. You'll get access to some exclusive Discord chat rooms where I'm always sharing what projects I'm currently working on weeks before the videos even go live, some custom Panzer emojis you can use on YouTube and on Discord, and of course that glorious Panzer helmet next to your name in the comments. Next up we have our support. These are additional draw engines. They will provide us with extra utility, allow us to convert our massive board state into an actual game win, and most importantly, this section does contain our flash enablers. Satoru the Infiltrator. And if you already thought Kadena was a crazy draw engine, just wait until you see this dude. It's a 2 mana menace body that whenever any sort of non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control without any mana being spent on it will allow you to draw a card. And this ability really works with anything that we're doing in this deck. It will trigger whenever we cast a Morph creature for free by using Kadena's ability. We'll get to draw a card whenever we get a trigger out of our Vanifax. And if you do have this thing on the battlefield combined with an Abhorrent Oculus, it will draw you up to 4 cards per turn cycle, really making him into one of the most efficient card draw engines in the entire deck because he only costs 2 mana. Just be warned that this ability does state 1 or more, so if multiple free creatures enter the battlefield under your control either by casting a Cyber Controller or they came from the pipes, you will only get to draw 1 card of his effect. And let's be honest, the alternate art wanted poster version of this card is one of the most beautiful cards in existence. Change my mind. Equilibrium, a 3 mana enchantment with a really unique ability that's just perfect for this deck. Whenever we cast any sort of creature spell, we get the option to pay 1 generic mana and then bounce any creature on the battlefield back to its owner's hand. Scaling perfectly with all of the free Morph creatures will be cheating in thanks to Kadena's cost reduction ability, allowing to just bounce our opponent's biggest creatures to destroy their tempo, clear the board of any sort of blockers, and we can even use this effect to return any sort of Morph creature back to our hand, which we will then be able to cast again on a later turn and then flip it again to gain its effect. Now where this card gets truly ridiculous is whenever you do have one of your flash enablers on the battlefield, because you can just cast one of your Morph creatures during each player's turn, Pay 1 generic mana to bounce another Morpher back to your hand, and it will make it really easy to get those 4 Kadena triggers per turn cycle. While on top of that, because you will now be able to play creatures on instant speed, you can use this effect as some sort of a protection tool. Just flash in a Morpher, pay 1 generic mana, and you will be able to bounce Kadena back to your hand if she is being targeted by any sort of spot removal. And talking about cards that are just the perfect fit for this deck, we're also playing Davy Jones, a 3 mana creature with 2 passive abilities. Whenever any of your creatures does become blocked, you get the option to return it back to your hand, and whenever any of your creatures do deal combat damage to an opponent, you get to draw a card. And this funny looking octopus does set your opponents up for some really hard decision making, because you'll now be able to just swing all of your face up morph creatures at your opponents. If they don't decide to block them, you will get a bunch of damage through and get to draw some cards in the process. And if they do decide to block them, they will just be bounced back to your hand, and you will be able to cheat them into play again for free with your commander, and then flip them again to get an additional use out of whatever morph ability they have. No matter what your opponents choose to do, this creature will always generate you a huge amount of value. Glaring Flashraker, a 3 mana Eldrazi creature that whenever we cast any sort of colorless spell will generate us a 0/1 Eldrazi token that we can sacrifice to add 1 colorless mana to our mana pool, providing us with additional colorless creature bodies we can start buffing up with our Kozilek or our Curated Bestie, while at the same time also giving us a really solid layer of additional mana generation. And it also comes with a second passive ability that whenever any colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control will make it deal 1 damage to each opponent, which will trigger off this card's own Eldrazi spawn generation. Any sort of face down creature entering the battlefield like our Morphers or anything we get out of Manifest Dread. We can even trigger this ability by casting any of our mana rocks, and if you are able to cast your Cyber Controller with X being like 10, this thing might result into an instant game win. Beastmaster Ascension, a 3 mana enchantment that will get a quest counter whenever any of your creatures attacks, and once this thing reaches 7 or more quest counters, it will give your entire board a whopping +5/+5 permanent stat boost. As you've seen, the board state of this deck will go incredibly wide, be it by cheating in 4 morph creatures per turn cycle thanks to Kadena and a Flash Enabler, generating a huge amount of face down creatures thanks to engines like a Curated Bestie, a Houndwood Shrieker or an Abhorrent Oculus, and it will even scale up all of the little Eldrazi spawn tokens you do get of your Glaring Flashraker. The more creatures you have on the battlefield, the more valuable this massive stat boost does become. And due to the fact it's this easy for this deck to go wide and get at least 7 creatures on the battlefield, you don't even have to stack this enchantment up during the early turns of the game. You can just wait until you have 7 creatures on the battlefield, then attack with them all at once, and this enchantment will instantly go online. Scroll of Fate, a simple 3 mana artifact we can tap to manifest any card we have in our hand, which basically means we will get to draw 1 additional card per turn cycle thanks to our commander's ability, and it also gives us the option to select a specific card we want onto the battlefield face down. You can cheat in Void Mage Apprentice whenever you do need a counterspell. You can manifest a Kozilek if you do have a Houndwood Shrieker on the battlefield to turn it face up for just 2 mana, or whenever you do have a bunch of lands in your hand that you don't have a use for anymore, you can just put them onto the battlefield face down as creatures and scale your board. Now let's get into our Flash Enablers, and we are playing a total of 4. The first one being Liberator, Urza's Battletopter, which is a 3 mana flash artifact creature that will allow us to cast any sort of colorless spell or artifact on instant speed, which, just like I explained in the intro, whenever you do have your commander on the battlefield, will allow you to cast any sort of morph creature for free during each player's turn because they are colorless spells, allowing us to generate that really wide board state while also getting us those 4 card draw triggers of Kadena that we're looking for in this deck. Now, outside of that ability, this creature will also get a +1/+1 counter whenever we cast any spell with a mana value higher than the power of this creature, allowing it to just scale its flying body over the course of the game and just turning it into a massive flying beatstick. And fun fact, since this thing is a colorless creature itself, it will even trigger our cards like a Glaring Flashraker and Eugen's ability if you did include him in the deck. Vivian, Champion of the Wilds, a 3 3 mana planeswalker that will give any creature spell we cast the flash mechanic, giving us exactly the same benefits with our commander like I talked about with the previous card, and she also comes with a really good -2 ability that will allow us to look at the top 3 cards of our library, pick one creature card from amongst them and then exile it. And for as long as it does remain in exile, we get the option to cast it for the rest of the game. And yeah, if you do exile a creature with the morph mechanic, you will be able to cast it for its morph cost straight from exile, just allowing us to dig deeper into our deck and giving us card advantage. Now, while usually planeswalkers do come with the downside that they're really easy to swing at by your opponents and take them off the board, with the huge amount of 2/2 face down creatures we're gonna be cheating in, it will be really easy to protect her. Leyline of Anticipation, a 4-mana enchantment that will give any spell that we cast a flash keyword, meaning that once this is on the battlefield, we don't actually have to cast any cards during our own turn anymore. We can just pass our turn and leave open all of our mana, and depending on whatever our opponents are doing, we can use it to activate something like 1,000 Winds, any of our morph counter creatures if an opponent is about to cast a big threat, and even if we don't need any sort of interaction, we can just cast whatever we wanted to cast during our own turn anyways on instant speed. Now, the best thing about this card is that whenever it is in your opening hand, you get to start the game with it on the battlefield, which does enable some really crazy scenarios because you will be able to get your Kadena out on turn 3, then start chaining your morph creatures during each player's turn, and by the time you get to your turn 4, you will have a crazy board state and a huge amount of cards in your hand. And our last but strongest flash enabler is the Blue Spirit, a 4-mana creature we got in the Avatar set that will enable us to cast the first creature spell we cast each turn on instant speed, which is just the perfect fit for our commander because we only want to cast one free morph creature every turn anyways. Now, where this card gets really crazy is its second ability, that whenever any non-token creature enters the battlefield during combat, we get to draw a card. And while obviously drawing 4 cards per turn cycle by flashing in these morph creatures with Kadena is already some absolutely crazy value, now instead of just flashing them in during a random phase of your opponent's turn, you will get priority in combat. You can then flash your creature in, and this thing combined with Kadena will enable you to draw up to 8 cards per turn cycle. Yeah, Zuko wearing a mask is an absolutely stupid card. Mystic Forge, a 4-mana artifact that will allow us to look at the top card of our library at any given time, and we get the option to cast any sort of colorless or artifact spell straight from the top, essentially allowing us to play with one additional card in our hand being the top card of our library, especially considering that any creature with the morph mechanic we have on the top of our library, whenever we do cast it for its morph cost, will turn the spell colorless before us actually casting it, and we will be able to do so with Mystic Forge, allowing us to just chain some morph creatures back to back for as long as we do keep hitting them from the top. This card also comes with an activated ability that will solve its biggest weakness, because if you do hit something on the top that isn't an artifact, a colorless creature, or something with the morph mechanic, you can't keep the value chain going. By tapping this artifact, you can just exile the top card of your library. If it is something like a land that you don't need, you will then get to reveal the next card, and if it is a colorless spell, you can just keep the storm turn going. Wilderness Reclamation, a 4-mana enchantment that at the beginning of your end step will allow you to untap all of your lands, meaning that during your turn you can just overcommit and put all of your face down morph creatures onto the board, just tapping out all of your mana. You can then just pass the turn, untap all of your lands, and you will instantly have all of your mana available to start flipping up any of your morph creatures depending on whatever your opponents are doing. Germination Practicum, a 5-mana spell that will put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature we control, and it also has the Paradigm mechanic, meaning whenever we cast this we get the option to exile it, and at the beginning of each one of our upkeeps for the rest of our game we get to cast a free copy of this spell, just making sure that our entire board of face down creatures keeps growing bigger and bigger every single turn, and especially considering that this deck is some sort of a mid-range control shell and is going for longer games, the longer the game actually last, the stronger this card's ability will become. Now while this is more of a slow burning threat, if you don't care about the budget, you can replace this card with a Triumph of the Hordes, which will give your entire board a +1/+1 stat boost, trample, and infect until the end of turn. Yeah, once you have a board filled with creatures, you can just cast this card, and the only thing you need is 10 combat damage on each opponent to just instantly win the game. And the last card in this section is Baby Eugen, a 6 mana colorless planeswalker that passively will reduce the cost of any colorless spell you cast by 2 generic mana. Now while obviously our commander already reduces the cost of any sort of morph creature we play for the first time during a turn to 0 mana, whenever you have this thing on the battlefield, it will be really easy to morph in even more creatures and draw even more cards of your commander's ability, while at the same time also reducing the cost of any of our mana rocks or any of the other colorless cards we are playing in this deck, like a Mystic Forge, or even reducing the mana cost of our Urza's Battletopter to 1 generic mana. Now while that's already some really solid value, Eugen also comes with 2 really relevant abilities. By plussing him, we get to exile the top card of our library and create a 2/2 creature token, which we can scale up with Curator Bestie or our Kozilek's Anthem effect, and whenever that token leaves the battlefield, we get to put the exiled card in our hand, essentially giving us some sort of card advantage, while his -3 ability will allow us to destroy any permanent on the battlefield that has 1 or more colors, be it a Warstorm Surge, your opponent's commanders, or even that little Esper Sentinel that already drew an opponent like 10 cards. Eugen will provide you with some immediate value in the form of removal from the turn you play it. Next up, we have our acceleration. While Kadena does allow us to cheat in these morph creatures for free, we still do need the mana to flip them face up and trigger their powerful effects. Exploration Broodship, a 1 mana spacecraft with the station ability, meaning we can tap any creature we control and we get to add charge counters onto this card equal to the tapped creature's power. Whenever this thing has 3 or more charge counters, it will function in exactly the same way as an exploration, allowing us to play an additional land card every single turn. And I can assure you, with all of the cards we'll be drawing of all of our engines like our commander, our Xatugo, or they came from the pipes, you will always have a bunch of extra lands sitting in your hand, and you will always have a use for this effect, which by the way also makes it really easy to trigger your Zamone 2 times in a single turn. And honestly, my favorite part about this card is how easy it is to get to that first station stage. You can just drop this card on turn 1, play a mana rock on turn 2, drop your commander on turn 3, and you will instantly be able to tap her to get this thing to its first station stage, because you can even tap creatures with Summoning Sickness to station up your spacecrafts. Now later in the game, once you do have a couple of face down bodies on the battlefield to station this card even further, whenever it does get to 8 charge counters, once during each of your turns, you get the option to discard any land card in your hand, and you get the ability to cast any permanent card from your graveyard by paying its mana cost, giving us yet another really solid recursion tool to just get back any sort of permanents that we lost over the course of the game. Now if you don't care about the budget for this deck, I'd actually recommend replacing this card with a Burgeoning, which is a 1 mana enchantment that whenever any opponent plays a land, allows you to put 1 land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Now while usually I'm not that big of a fan of a Burgeoning because you will eventually just run out of cards in your hand, with a huge amount of cards we'll be drawing in this list, you will always have a huge amount of lands available to play with this effect. We're also playing 5 regular mana rocks in this deck, being a Sol Ring, an Arcane Signet, 2 of the Talismans, and a Thought Vessel. Now all of these cards just have one single thing in common, and that is that they will allow us to cast Kadena from as early as turn 3, allowing us to then instantly follow up with a free morph creature thanks to her ability and drawing us a card in the process. And one of the most important gameplay tips I can give you for this deck is that whenever you draw your opening hand, you want at least 1 acceleration option to be in there. Just keep taking mulligans until you're able to find one, because this deck feels totally different to play if your Kadena comes down on turn 4 instead of turn 3. Farseek and Nature's Lore, 2 non-creature spells that will allow us to go fetch up a land from our deck and put it onto the battlefield, which are included in the deck for exactly the same reason as the mana rocks, but on top of that they will also filter our deck by fetching the lands out of it, and we can use them to go fetch up the specific lands we need to help with our color fixing. Steve, a 2-mana creature we can sacrifice to search our library for any sort of basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Now while usually I'm not that big of a fan of including Steve in any of my decks because he only fetches up basic lands, in this type of deck he does scale incredibly well whenever we do get him onto the battlefield face down by manifesting or manifesting Dread, because we'll easily be able to flip him face up again by just paying 2 mana and we will still be able to sacrifice him to get his acceleration effect. Overgrown Zealot, a 2-mana creature we can tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, which by itself is already some pretty okay value, but he also comes with the ability that we can tap him to add 2 mana of any color to our mana pool instead, but we can only use it to turn any of our permanents face up, making this into a really efficient dork to turn up any of our manifested creatures or any of our morphers. Now if you don't care about the budget, I'd actually recommend you including a Bloom Tender over this guy, which baseline is also a 2-mana mana dork that will tap for 1 mana, but once you do have your commander or any sort of colored creatures on the battlefield, it will tap for 3 instead, making it even more efficient. Enduring Vitality. This thing is basically a Cryptolith Rite attached to a creature body, because it will give all creatures we control the ability that we can tap them to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, essentially turning our entire board into Birds of Paradise. Now as you can imagine, with the huge amount of face down creatures we'll be controlling at any given time, this thing will enable us to produce ridiculous amounts of mana, making it really easy to get our biggest threats into play or pay for any sort of big morph cost that any of our creatures might have. Now there are 2 reasons why I did decide to include this creature over an actual Cryptolith Rite. First up, because it is a creature and we do manage to get it onto the battlefield face down by manifesting it, we still get the ability to flip it up for 3 mana and get a use out of its effect. And the second reason is that whenever your opponents manage to remove this creature for the first time, it will just return to the battlefield as an enchantment, essentially forcing your opponents to use 2 removal spells on this thing to permanently get rid of it. And a card with a very similar effect is an Elven Chorus, which is a 4 mana enchantment that will also give the ability of a Birds of Paradise to all of our creatures. Now while this is not as efficient as an Enduring Vitality because it is an enchantment and not a creature and it does cost you 1 mana more, it does come with an ability that's really similar to Mystic Forge that will allow you to look at the top card of your library at any given time and you will be able to cast creature spells from the top, which is really nice, especially considering that whenever you do have a full board of creatures, you can tap all of them for mana to just keep chaining creatures from the top of your deck and overwhelm your opponents. And the last card in this section is Threats Around Every Corner, which is a 4 mana enchantment that whenever any face down permanent enters the battlefield under your control will allow you to search for a basic land in your deck and put it onto the battlefield tapped. And as you can imagine, this effect is just cracked in this deck. It'll trigger whenever you cast 3 morphs of Kadena, it'll fetch you 4 lands per turn cycle with an Abhorrent Oculus, and whenever you do resolve a Cyber Controller for a significant amount, it will just filter all of the basic lands from your deck, just making sure that you have a gazillion lands on the table while also reducing the chances of you drawing into lands in the late game and really thinning out our deck. And this thing also has a crazy interaction with Zimone, because every time a face down permanent now enters, you will get a basic land, giving you a Zimone trigger and allowing you to turn one of your face down creatures face up. And if that crazy ability wasn't enough yet, whenever this thing enters the battlefield, you even get to manifest Dread, instantly accelerating your mana, drawing you a card of Kadena, and giving you an additional face down creature body. Next up, we have our protection and interaction. Now, one of the things I love most about this deck is that almost all of our interaction is already built into our face down morph creatures. But outside of those, we're also playing a small package of highly efficient protection and interaction spells that will help us keep Kadena on the board and disrupt whatever our opponents are doing. Revitalizing Repast. For 1 hybrid mana on instant speed, we get to put 1/1/1 counter on any creature and it will gain indestructible until the end of turn. A really cost efficient way to protect both your commander and any sort of high value creature in the deck from spot removal or any sort of board wipe. And if you don't need its effect, you can just play the backside, which is a land that enters the battlefield tapped and taps for either a black or a green mana. You should really view all all of these NDFC lands as land cards first that do have an additional benefit whenever you do draw into them later in the game. Now a good thing to mention is that whenever you are able to get this card onto the battlefield as a face down 2/2 creature, it won't actually be a land but just a colorless 2/2 creature with no abilities. Assassin's Trophy. For 2 mana on instant speed you get to destroy any target permanent, allowing you to deal with problematic lands like a Valakut or a Field of the Dead, any sort of big creature threat, and you can even use this to get problematic artifacts and enchantments off the battlefield. The controller of that permanent will get to fetch a basic land and put it into play, but usually that doesn't really matter, because you'll just be able to get the biggest threat of the battlefield for just 2 mana and just give them a little bit of acceleration in return. Familiar's Ruse, a card with exactly the same effect as a classic counterspell, but it does come with an additional line of text. As an additional cost to casting this spell, you have to return 1 creature you control back to your hand. And while this might seem really inefficient, it is actually a really big benefit for this deck, because you'll just be able to bounce back any sort of morph creature you already flipped face up to gain its effect, and on a later turn you will then just be able to cast it again for free with Kadena and even draw a card of it. Golgari Charm, a 2 mana instant speed spell that is in my opinion one of the best Ravnica charms out there. The first option will give all creatures -1/-1 until the end of turn, which is just the perfect tool to shut down any sort of skewed swarm or Krenko player. The second option will allow you to destroy an enchantment, giving you the perfect answer for Heuristic Study, a Smothering Tide, or a Summon Bahamut that's about to get to its final stage. And the third and probably the most relevant option for this deck is that it will regenerate each creature you control. Now as you can imagine, the biggest weakness of a deck that's about to go this wide and get this many face down creatures on the battlefield are board wipes, which this little spell will save your entire board from for just 2 mana. Wrap in Vigor, a 2 mana spell that has exactly the same effect as Golgari Charm's last ability. Now while this card is a strict downgrade to Golgari Charm because it doesn't come with additional options, we really don't mind running 2 copies of this effect in the deck, because nothing feels as bad as you spending multiple turns building up a solid board and then an opponent just taking out all of your effort by casting a single board wipe. And a small little budget upgrade you can do is replacing this card with a Heroic Intervention, which will give all permanents you control both hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn for just 2 mana, making it function in exactly the same way to just prevent board wipes. But since it also gives hexproof, you can use it to protect your creatures from things like a Path to Exile, and since its effect applies to all of your permanents, you can even use it to protect any of your high value enchantments. And the last card in this section is Gift of Doom, an enchantment with the morph mechanic, meaning we will be able to get it onto the battlefield as a cantrip for free with Kadena, and it has a really unique morph cost that instead of us having to pay mana to flip it, will require us to sacrifice a creature, which usually in this deck with all of the tokens we'll be generating and all of the manifesting we'll be doing will never be a problem. And once this thing is turned face up, we get to attach it to any creature we control and it will gain both that touch and indestructible, making it into a really efficient free protection tool we can just hook up to our Kadena, and your opponents will have a really hard time to ever get her off the board. And a really nice thing to note about this card is that whenever it does flip face up, the attach it to a creature isn't actually an ability that goes on the stack. So even if your opponents do have a Stifle in their hand, they won't even be able to use it on this ability. And finally, we have our mana base. Since this is a 100 euro budget build, I did decide to keep things really simple and really consistent, meaning that we are playing a handful of basic lands and a couple of utility lands that will provide us with additional value over the course of the game. Bojuka Boch, a very simple land that you should be including in every single black deck that you build. Whenever it enters a battlefield, you get to exile target player's graveyard, and this little effect might just win you the game against some specific decks. You can use this versus any sort of landfall deck that's about to juggle lands in and out of their graveyard. This little land gives any sort of reanimator player the cold sweats at night, and even against any sort of spellslinger deck that plays a ton of cards with a flashback mechanic, this thing can just totally ruin their day. Reliquary Tower, a land that taps for a colorless mana and passively will make it so that you don't have a maximum hand size. Now, even though a ton of casual players do include a Reliquary Tower in any deck that they build, I'm not a fan of this card. But I have to admit, in this deck we'll just be drawing that many cards that having no maximum hand size actually does come in quite handy. Branch of the Vitu-Ghazi and Zoetic Cavern. These are both lands that tap for a colorless mana and do come with both the Disguise and the Morph mechanic, meaning they act as additional fodder that we can cheat onto the battlefield for free by using Kadena's ability and even drawing a card of it, and on a later turn we can just turn them face up again and they will function as some sort of acceleration pieces. There really is no reason to not be playing these lands in this type of deck, because even if you cheat them in with your commander and you never decide to flip them, they will just replace themselves by drawing you a card anyways. And for the regular mana producing lands, we're playing 3 fast lands, 3 pain lands, 3 check lands, 3 tango lands, 2 slow lands, 2 cycle lands, a horizon land, an exotic orchid, a command tower, the Sultai landscape, and for basics we're playing 4 forests, 4 islands, and 2 swamps. And that's it for my take on Kadena Slinking Sorcerer. Even though this commander was originally released back in 2019, I do think it has aged pretty well. In fact, thanks to all of the new face down support that we did receive in the last couple of years, I really think that this deck is more fun than it's ever been. Every game you play with this deck will feel completely different. Your opponents will constantly be trying to figure out what your face down cards actually are, while you're just sitting there behind your army of trap cards waiting for the perfect moment to flip them over. This is by far one of the most unique commander decks that I've ever built, and I genuinely think that every commander player should experience playing a face down deck at least once. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, let me know by dropping these weird mask emojis in the comments below. And while you're down there, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so you won't miss next week's video. Anyways, thanks for watching, enjoy setting up your trap cards, and I will see you in the next one.